Welcome, adventurers and fellow world builders. My name is Yadro, and this is Yadro Gaming. Today we're going to be speaking with another one of my players in the new campaign we just started. This is Dallas, and he has a character named Mongo, a half-orc monk that he's brought into the campaign, who I'm really enjoying already. And for the second session that we just completed, he is the one that was kind of the catalyst for all of the chaos that occurred. So it's going to be interesting to get his perspective on what he did, why he did it, and a little bit of background on his character choices as well. Let's hear how my conversation with him went. All right, Dallas, thank you so much for taking the time to discuss session 2 that we just completed. You were kind of my highlight character of this session based on some of the decisions that you made, so I'd love to talk about it a little bit. So you got into a little bit of trouble. We made it to the crossroads. You had a chance to get into your stressor or de-stressor a little bit with a flagellation, and Mongo is going after a new god. So those were all the big things that happened, but can you tell me a little bit about Mongo and like why and how you came up with him and yeah, just kind of what was his motivation?
Yeah, I think Mongo, I wanted to do so. The last few campaigns, I've done more magic based characters, so I wanted to transition to a more like martial character. So I thought a monk would be interesting. Excuse me. And I wanted to eventually kind of go into the barbarian space, but I wasn't really sure how I was going to get there. So yeah, I wanted to do a martial character that was intelligence stupid, so that I could do that. But then I didn't realize until we got to our first session that I was also sort of the tank as a monk, which wasn't stellar. but it's been interesting. It's been interesting to do a campaign where we don't have. I mean, now we do. I would say we're kind of establishing that as we go, but like we don't have a big frontline person.
Do you find that it is interesting, or is that like stressful as a player that like you guys have to be a little bit more creative in how you approach that in combat?
Uh, I think it's a lot more creative only because I feel like there are times we've played in the past where we go into combat and it's like, okay, well, we know this person's going to like run in and start doing stuff, so we can kind of hang back and do this. But now we have to be like, okay, what if nobody goes in?
Yeah. Or who's it going to be this
what,
time?
like, yeah, what do we do? Is it going to be, is it one of the artificers that planned something for today? Is it going to be the rogue who's going to sneak in? Am I just going to like try to punch and then run away? But it also helps that I'm a half orc. So I have I forget what the skill is called, but basically instead of dropping to 0, I drop to 1.
And that's already saved your butt at least one time.
Yeah, I think I've used it twice. It was like twice in one thing almost. Or no, I guess it would have been whatever it was. It's been helpful, but I also forgot that existed the first time I used it, which was a blessing.
Oh yeah, I remember us really stressing because you went down, and I think both of the basilisks were on you, and you were like, "Wait a second, I have orcish resilience or whatever it's called," and it like totally swung the combat back in the other way.
For sure. Yeah. And then I just rolled lucky and like smashed a bunch of stuff and it all worked out. But one of these days, that's not going to work all the time. But I welcome that day.
I think a couple players are kind of burning the candle at both ends and seeing how long they can go on some of their antics before things go awry. So you might be in that category as well.
Hey, we'll see.
So well, first off, I just love how you develop characters, and I love how you kind of let the story unfold and let us know what that looks like. But how did you come up with the idea of the pamphlets for Durr?
Yeah. Yeah. So when we did the quiet year, it's always interesting because you kind of go into the quiet year being like, here's what my character's gonna be a little bit. And then, like, for me, my initial plan going into it was I wanted to do a wizard who wanted to be a fighter. So he like didn't want to use his magic. He just wanted to fight. And I was going to try to make him like a wizard samurai who hated doing magic.
Wow.
Cuz I was like, that'll be interesting. That'll be fun. There's some room in there for antics. But then once we started the quiet year and it got to like, I'm from Durr. It's this isolated mountain place. Also, everyone's dead. The weather's terrible. The leader died. I was like, okay, so what? That doesn't really fit into that. But this like isolationist monk does. And if he's making his way all the way to the crossroads with everyone else, like, why would he be going? And it's to, try to get people back. So I was like, the easiest way to do that is, why not pass out pamphlets with information on them?
It's a great way to do it and spread the word. And I guess Brellwood actually did fall. Like we decided that that settlement was dead. Durr did not
Mm-hmm.
technically fall, but it sounds like, I think in your backstory, that you had made yourself like the only survivor there. But you've been passing out these pamphlets, hoping to gather some people to go back. So I'm really curious how that's going to play out in the future. And honestly, I haven't thought that far ahead about Durr because you guys haven't decided to go there yet. But I just think those are really
Mm-hmm.
interesting character choices. That's awesome.
Yeah, I think once we were like the weather was there was a terrible ice storm. I was like, well, this is easy to be like. Why would people come up here then if this place sucks this bad?
Well, it's the pilgrimage.
Why do we keep going?
You have to
So
suffer.
I think, yeah, and the idea of just being like, yeah, this place is terrible. Maybe I'll hand out a pamphlet to convince people to go. I thought that would be an interesting take, and I mean it's been it's been interesting so far.
Can you tell me a little bit about your interest in Ball? Like, what you had a whole list of like deities and gods since you were from Durr about what you might explore, but why did you end up on Ball?
Yeah, so I made that list of like a bunch of gods because I was like, oh, we made Durr abundant in like religious iconography. So I wanted to make a quick chart that was like, oh, if he's heard of this god, maybe there's like a cave drawing of him, or there's like a poster or a shrine. Like some gods are more important than others up in Durr. So I wanted to be able to be knowledgeable of that if it came up in gameplay. So the reason I chose Ball was because that first combat where I was, I think I don't remember if it was just me that did the killing blows for both of the basilisks, but like it was pretty violent and pretty bloody. So I was like, okay, is there like a god of some sort of like death or like murder? And he is the god of like violence and violent death. So I was like, okay, maybe, since Mongo is kind of lost in what he's doing, like, oh, this was the first time he's been very successful in something at at level 1.
Yes.
Or level like very low level. So I was like, okay, this kind of sets that trajectory. And it just kind of worked out that it lent itself to like barbarianism too. So I was like, okay, we'll just kind of go with this. So I took the monk and did more of like, because I don't want him to be a cleric. But if he keeps worshiping a god, he's gonna end up some sort of religious. But I think he just is wanting some of that power he's never had as somebody who's like huge and punches things all the time. So I think I'm interested to see how that plays out. Because I mean, how well could worship, like praying to a god of murder, work out? But I'm interested to see how that is.
I love that. And I guess that kind of, I've got two different questions I want to pull off of that one. But the first one is, like right now, the big drama in the TTRPG space, or at least one of the pieces of it, is that like, orcs are not inherently violent, where they shouldn't be. Like that's kind of a racial stereotype on their part, and players should avoid that. Do you have that in mind as you are a half orc? And I'm totally fine with it because I think kind of overcoming those like aggression, anger type things is like a cool aspect to have for a character, especially like a monk half orc. But does that like play into your thought process at all on how you develop him?
I didn't really think about it because I made him, when I kind of put Mongo together, like I made him very stupid because I think it's just always, for me, it's always easier to play dumber characters because then I don't have to be like, I know the history of everything, or I'm super smart. My character can just be dumb and I can kind of like tap out of that stuff. But I think with like the violence, the only reason I really did that was I think like I had crit twice. Like the dice rolls were like, you crushed this thing. And so it's kind of like, oh, if I can do it where he is inherently strong and is like, I don't want to say like of mice and menning it, but like he's very big and very strong, but doesn't always mean to like do that. If he can focus that, and that's probably where he, where his strength lies instead of passing out pamphlets, I think it's channeling a rage instead of being inherently rageful. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah. I really like that, and I think that makes total sense with how you're playing that character. I just I don't know. I love having you at my table because I just think you're very creative in how you do these things, and I feel like you kind of see and connect the dots in a similar way that I do. I'm just trying to do it for a whole campaign, and you just do it like masterfully with one character. So I really like that about you having you at the table. So the other bit of like trouble maybe that you got yourself into was you're practicing punching, you're hitting on some trees a little bit, bloodying your hands some while you're training, and you heard a knock in the woods, responding to what you were doing, hitting the tree. So as I was setting that up, and you didn't know what was happening, like what were you thinking about when you heard those first knocks come back to you from the woods?
Yeah, I think, and this is another part where I'm, excuse me, I'm not always the most astute as a player when it comes to like something is happening. So when it's just focused on me, I'm like, okay, this is my time. I can figure this out. And then again, sometimes it's just nicer to play characters that are dumber so that if I miss something, like, oh, Mongo missed that, as opposed to Dallas being like, yeah, you're knocking on trees. The trees are knocking back. You know what that means. And you're just like, well, I guess we'll see what happens. It might have been an echo. So, yeah, I think but again, I can't even be upset of like, I can't believe that happened because I went into it. I specifically said, without even thinking, like, he's practicing his punching on trees, which is just wood knocking. So I couldn't be like, that's so stupid of me. Why would I do that? It's like, no, I had a reason for doing it. And then it ended up attacking us. And that's just what had to happen.
Exactly.
I don't know. And it's one of those things going back to where you try to think before where it's like, well, how could I have done it differently? And it's like, well, this thing probably would have attacked us somehow, but I just happened to be doing the perfect thing and made the perfect choice for you to be like, well, here it is. It's happening faster.
Yes, and it's like I had foreshadowed, like Corrigan Sledge, the marshal had asked you guys to take care of this thing at some point, but it was like way too strong for you right now, and you should just avoid it. So you went out there and you kind of like taunted it, and I had a little bit of like Yeti background information in there. And I just kind of reskinned a monster,
Mm-hmm.
but that monster, its difficulty level is way above what your party should be able to handle. So like I did not expect you guys to fight it. I thought that maybe it would like grab one of you and pull you into the woods when you were unconscious or something, and the party would have to like kind of stalk after him. But I think that the first session you guys did great, but the second session when you guys fought that thing, and like all of you, like you were using fairy fire, you were silvery barbsing, we had people like jumping into the fray and like dodging, and like very few of his attacks landed, especially his gaze. And like it could have been
Mm-hmm.
a really bad situation for you, where I think you guys weren't even aware of how much danger you were in until you like actually hit one of you guys for like 18 damage or something, and someone just immediately went down. But I guess I'm curious how that fight felt for you as a player as it was all going down.
Yeah, I think for me, when stuff like that happens, because I've run a few like one shots before, I've never run like a full campaign, and I kind of understand the like, this is what is probably set up, how it's prepared, how things can go. You're much better at everything feels planned, so even when we go off the rails, you're like, yeah, we're fine. Whereas I'm like, oh crap, what now? I didn't expect this. But when things happen like that, I think like halfway through that fight is when I was like, this thing feels very powerful. We brought this on ourselves. Like this, if we can get through this, we should be back on track. And I think just going back, because, initially if you're a bunch of low level players and you're like, why is he sending this like gross Yeti thing after us that's like kicking our butts? And it's like, well, again, Mongo summoned it essentially. And then it was very powerful, and we'd heard it was powerful. So we can be upset that it's very strong, but like it is what happened.
And I'm
So
hoping,
I just kind of roll with it.
yeah, and I really appreciate that about you. But I guess my question is, like, does it make the world feel more real? That like there is, every fight is not perfectly balanced for you. There are these creatures out there that are dangerous and they're roaming, and you know that they're dangerous. But how does that like feel as a player? Does it just feel kind of like foreign? Like, oh, here's an encounter. I guess we got to deal with it.
No, I think that it definitely makes it feel more of it makes it feel more realistic in the sense that it's not a video game, it's not a TV show we're watching where it's like we have to be a little mindful of our decisions. I know we can get a little hectic with like we're going to do this and we're going to go off and do that, and it's like okay, but those do have like repercussions. So you just have to be able to like be able to live with that. I think it also I don't have a stronger opinion on it only because like if Mongo dies next session, I'm not me, Dallas, the player. I'm more than happy to like roll a new character. I'm very happy to be like, hey, that was the story for this character. He made a dumb decision. This is what happened. Let's get into new. But I know I've played with some people who are like, this character is my baby, so I don't want anything to happen to it. And I just don't make that connection the same. So yes, it makes the world feel more lived in, but I think me above the table is able to be more detached from that character. So I don't go in being like, this character has to live. I have to do everything I can. Like, yes, I will try my best, but I'm not gonna like hold on to it. And does that make sense?
Yeah, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Okay.
And I don't get the impression that you ever play like recklessly. Like I think that you do, like you like your characters, obviously, and especially if we're going to spend, 20 or 30 sessions with them, I want you to like them. But I'm just making a note that it is okay to kill Mongo, and I can target him a little bit harder.
For sure, for sure. And I mean, well, and he's also like the perfect thing where I'm like, he has no family that he knows of. He's by himself. He's a loner. He found this group, and he's like probably the lowest intelligence wise, isn't super charismatic. So I'm like, yeah, like, of course. And he's the front line right now. So I'm like, of course he's good. He has like the highest chance to die.
Yeah, so you kind of are at the front line, and if Mongo would die, I really like the idea of that samurai wizard. Like I don't.
I I planned it out so much, and then it's one of those things again, D&D, where I'm like, I have to stop planning because if one thing goes wrong, it's going to change everything, and I'm just going to be like, well, that was a lot of time. But like, I know I wanted to make a like portent wizard so that I had those roles.
Yeah.
But then him be like, I reject magic, I only worship the blade. But he has no armor. So like he's truly stupid, but like I wanted to build that up so it's like he ends up being a fighter that has some magic. But yeah, that's that's in my back pocket.
Okay, I like that. And like you could also choose your spells like strategically to apply to that. And I'd
Mm-hmm.
be really curious to see how you like problem solve that. We did like the survey beforehand, and are you like pro or con the survey?
I like the survey a lot. I think it kind of helps me as the player. And again, I've done this 3 times now, but it helps me as the player be like, oh yeah, this isn't just like like you do a lot of work for this and it's based off of what we want to do. So like it's a time of reflection for me to be like, oh yeah, I have to like think about these things instead of just being like, show up with your character, we're gonna run around in the forest, and it's like, no, who do you want to fight, what do you want to do? I really like the survey.
Okay. I just wanted to confirm because I really like it too. And you just described what I'm hoping that my players get out of it. So it's just good to hear.
Yeah, it sets that expectation.
For sure. During that survey, I asked you guys about your problem player type, and you labeled yourself as a jokester, which is something that I would probably say that is your problem player type, although you're not
Mm-hmm.
problematic. But can you just talk about that a little bit for me about why you labeled yourself like that and why do you prefer that style?
Yeah, I think just me inherently as a person tend to lean more toward the comedy. I was like, life is too stressful. We have enough going on. Like something has to be funny. We have to try to like liven it up a little bit, even if it's dire. that's just kind of how I approach everything. So especially when we're in the world of dragons, like why does everything have to be so serious? And there are times that I'm not going to jump in and crack a joke. But I think it's just again my inherent nature to be like, let's liven it up a little bit, let's have fun. But I also think most of the time, if my sometimes my characters, like going back to like our first campaign where it was like Trevor wasn't like a clown character, but I am. And then going into like last campaign with my auto gnome, he was much more of a clown. And now, like, Mongo's not a clown, I don't think, at all. So it's just trying to separate. I don't know. I want to be funny, but my character doesn't always have to be. That doesn't always work side by side at a table.
But I,
Does that make sense?
yes, and but I just feel again like you do such a good job of like sprinkling it in, or like Mongo might just do something that seems kind of innocuous, and then it becomes like just like a funny moment that he had off to the side, or
Mm-hmm.
Dallas himself makes a joke off to the side that I think just like adds to the mood and lightens the table a little bit. But you have really good timing to like not be disruptive with it, and I appreciate that.
I was also going to say, I remember what I was going to say too. I also think comedic characters are more tragic because in a lot of things, like if you find out, like why are they using funny as not that me Dallas is tragic, but comedic characters tend to be, I don't know, more layered in my opinion. If somebody's like, I don't know, the classic D&D trip where it's like my family's dead, I'm an orphan, I must avenge them, I must do this, and it's like, okay, I get it, that's everything. But if somebody's super funny and you find out why they're super funny, sometimes it's not great. And I think that's just more interesting to me as a hook.
And I think that's human too. Like I think people are just like that in general. But the way that you just described that like brings me to like your background a little bit, in that you probably have like the most theater experience at the table. Is that what draws you to like tabletop role playing games and Dungeons and Dragons, or is this just like a creative outlet for you?
You know, I thought it would. I didn't start playing D&D until COVID, mostly because I didn't have the time. I was working all the time or I was in shows all the time. But, you know, I'd heard people talk about it, and then I got very spoiled, and my first introduction to Dungeons and Dragons was Dropout, where everything's like super produced, super well done, professional, like everything. So I was like, oh, this is just what every game of Dungeons and Dragons is like. So then when I would start playing and it was like, oh, we're just using like a whiteboard and a grid, that's not really, I have to kind of go back into like the theater of the mind type of stuff. I think I thought it would translate better from my acting background, but I think it's less the acting background. The only thing that really gives me, I think, is that like I'm not afraid to speak up at a table full of people I don't know, or like tell a story of that kind of sort. I don't know. I guess another thing that really helps me is being able to like kind of listen to other people and kind of figure out their intention, because that's all you're doing on stage when you're acting, really. So when you're sitting at a table and somebody's like doing a scene by themselves and you're kind of watching them go through this thing, you can kind of figure out, I don't know, I don't want to say empathetic, but you can kind of just be like, okay, that's where the work that they've done is now showing, that's where they're coming from. Because it's mostly, I'd say it's more improv than it is like classic theater, which I'm not great at and have no interest in. But doing it at a table where I get to play an orc who's a monk makes it easier.
Yes, and you are better than what you give yourself credit for. I will say that, and I think the other players would agree.
And I think, like, even the stuff that you do behind the screen, having to think quickly, I think a lot of times, I know I pick it up, and probably everyone does by now, but like, a lot of times DMs, if you look behind that screen, there is not a lot back there that's like story, story, story. Sometimes. Sometimes there is. But I think a lot of times you do a very good job of making it seem like this is the story, this is what happened next, when, I don't know, you could be crapping your pants back there being like, I don't have any of this prepared, but we're just going to wing it and see how this turns out.
I mean, that was essentially the entirety of this second session. You guys went in a direction I did not anticipate at all. So,
See, and and we had no idea. So kudos to you as well.
Well, thank you. So, I mean, you did mention that this is your third campaign with me in 2 years or 2.5 years, whatever it's been. Why, why do you want to stay like at this table with this group of people that we brought together and not look for another one?
I think my biggest thing is in my regular life, just like crave structure. And I think you've set up a very good environment where it's like we meet on this day at this time regularly. And even if, one or two people can't make it, it still happens. We figure something out. So I think it's like the structure that I crave of being like, I know when this is going to happen. I know what I need to prepare. On top of, I mean, everybody that's there, I enjoy and have a good time with. So it's just like a win-win for me. You're also, I think, you're the first DM that I've played with outside of like my friend group. And I really like the way that you run things. So it just, again, works out for me that I'm like, I like the way that you run things. I like how the game works. I like the people we play with. I like the structure. So it just kind of like checks all the boxes for me.
Well, that's great to hear because I want to keep you at the table. So I'm glad to hear that you like it. So Dallas is a phenomenal player to have at the table, and I'm so glad that he's been with me for 3 campaigns now. I'm really looking forward to see where his character development goes from here and how he handles some of the challenges I throw his way. Thank you for following along with the channel and these videos that I'm putting out. I hope you enjoy the interviews because I think they give a little bit of a peek behind the curtain on what I as a DM think and what my players think as well. I'll see you in the next video. And remember, why be a player when you can be a god?